This year's Munich Security Conference in Europe will perhaps go down as one of the most historic moments in transatlantic relations. Vice President J.D. Vance did nothing less than question not only the foundations of the bilateral alliance, but also the values that they supposedly share. In fact, he went as far as even chiding some of the European countries for being a bit of too woke. To make matters worse, the United States also signaled that it'd rather directly deal with Russia rather than include Europe and even Ukraine in a potential negotiation of peace over the Ukrainian conflict. In short, Europe's relationship with the United States is in a state of crisis. But crisis could also be an opportunity for Europe to pursue its own strategic autonomy. In fact, if there's anything that is interesting about Europe's evolving defense posture in recent years, is that it's not only improving its own defensive capabilities, it's also reaching out to new strategic partners and like-minded middle powers. And no region is as important to determining the future of global order in the 21st century than our region, the Indo-Pacific region. The Philippines, now one of the fastest growing economies in the world, a mid-sized country, a self-conscious middle power, is also reaching back. So for once in a long, long time, both Europe, ASEAN, and in particular the Philippines, are coalescing and are coming together in order to create perhaps a third force, or at least improve their strategic autonomy as growing uncertainties emerge about America's foreign policy, and not to mention the revisionist and hegemonic ambitions of Russia and China. To better understand what is Europe's evolving defense and foreign policy posture, and the future of Europe's relations with key ASEAN countries like the Philippines, we have a special guest. Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Merci for joining us. It's always great to catch up with our good friends. We had your, of course, predecessor as our very first guest, actually, on this show. So now we're, I don't know, episode 70 or whatever. So on our very first episode, we had your great predecessor. And back then, this is 2022, we're talking about all sorts of different possibilities for bilateral relationship. And now here we are, and big things have finally happened. Obviously, speaking of big things, we want to talk about this concept of strategic autonomy, especially how Europe is going to cope with this, let's just call it, potential upending of transatlantic relations under the Trump 2.0 administration after the whole kerfuffle at the Munich Security Conference, if I can put it that way, especially with the Ukraine issue front and center. Obviously here in Southeast Asia, including key allies like the Philippines, are also scratching their head and wondering what's next for us. Although comparatively, we feel that maybe Trans-Pacific relations is in a slightly different place because we don't have those kind of values-based debates. It's much more personalized, if not transactional. But nevertheless, of course, there are concerns about American isolationism or inward looking foreign policy and protectionism soon. But before going there, let's talk about even more important thing. So a couple of big things have happened in our bilateral relations, Ambassador. Yes. So on one hand, finally, Air France has returned to the town. Can you tell us a little bit about the whole process behind it without spilling the beans, and how was the event? Because the last time we talked, we were talking about how the event is supposed to be. So how did it turn out?
How did it went? But first of all, let me thank you for having me today. I will come back, I guess, on many issues that you have already mentioned, and Ukraine being one of them, because we are today 3 years after the launch the launch of the war in Ukraine. So I will have to come back to that. But to answer your nice question about Air France, yes, Air France is back 20 years after Air France left the country, and the direct flight between Manila and Paris resumed last December. It's a 3 times a week flight, night flight, and as far as I can see, it's a huge success. The flights are full. I've experienced it myself, and I have to say it's nice to be able to go back so fast to my country. It's the only one actually direct flight connecting the Philippines to Europe, so it was kind of...
Unless you call Turkish Airlines Istanbul as Europe.
As you wish, you wish, but let's
Western
say
Europe,
Western Europe or EU even.
Right.
It's the only one direct flight, and I can sense already the dynamic here. It really corresponds to a time when my country friends, but also my European colleagues, we look better at the Philippines, at the situation here, and be it tourists, students, or business, they are starting to get more and more interest. And of course, the fact that we now have a direct flight will help maybe come here more often or more regularly, which is a really good news.
You spoke about giving the Philippines a second look, and in many ways, I think that was really the hope of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. When he took the reins. He said, essentially, we have to reintroduce the Philippines. And I remember very well in 2015, 16, 17, when we had this very difficult transition, to be honest about it, from the Aquino administration, reformist, liberal, pro-rules-based international order, taking China to International Court over South China Sea, and then suddenly you had the Duterte administration. And I think everyone can fill in the blanks, right? So those are very difficult moments, because I remember some of the senior EU ambassadors would come to me and say, Richard, these were all the plans we had for bilateral relations. And then suddenly everything was not only on hold, some of the things that we had achieved were also now suddenly being put under question, including preferential trade agreements that we have had, or trade access that we have to Europe, not to mention, the FTA negotiations, for instance, were put on freeze. We had back and forth with, bureaucrats in Europe. And to be honest, I mean, my question always was like, it's not like some of the other Southeast Asian countries you have FTA with are necessarily liberal democracies. But nevertheless, those days, those, I would say, dark days, fortunately, at least so far, are behind us. And now suddenly we're giving each other a second look. Can you give us a better idea of how is the Philippines viewed? Because last year I had conversation, for instance, with outgoing Chancellor Scholz, and he was very happy with his meeting with President Marcos Jr. And when I discussed Philippines and German relations, and he was saying like there's so much potential there. And my sense with a lot of European leaders and policymakers was almost there was a sense of a guilt that we overlooked the Philippines, because everything is Vietnam nowadays, and it used to be Thailand and Singapore, and of course Indonesia is the giant coming over. Can you tell us a little bit about this, let's say, giving the Philippines a second gaze or complete reorientation? Is it because the Philippines is now again a booming economy? Is it because of domestic reforms or geopolitical alignments?
I think it's a reciprocal better look at one another, because at the same time, we Europeans, we French, we started looking better at the Indo-Pacific region as a whole since 2018, when President Macron decided to launch the strategy on Indo-Pacific. So we started to shift a little bit towards Asia, and particularly Southeast Asia, and now looking better at countries like the Philippines. So we had that movement, but at the same time, indeed, as you mentioned, since 2022, your country has also maybe started also giving a better chance. So now the situation is great because it's a reciprocal will to do more together. So the window is open, but it means that we have also to work on it, because what I feel from my country is that the Philippines still is not very well known. And we mentioned Air France, and it's been a journey to make them come back. And at the very first day, they were like, okay, the Philippines, why? What is it? And when we start showing the numbers, your population, your dynamism, your growth, and the potential indeed is quite clear. But we have to continue to make that known in my country, in Europe. So from time to time, my impression is that I am here, of course, ambassador of France in the Philippines, but from time to time, I'm also advocating for the Philippines back in my country. And that's why we organized just for the launch of the direct flight, Philippine Weeks in Paris from December 9 to December 13. And it gave a huge occasion to many French people to see more of the Philippines. We had a great delegation, many Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Science and Technology, the Commandant of the Coast Guards. They all took the flight, went to Paris and met their counterparts. And that really contributes to, I think, a better mutual understanding, which is key for enhancing our partnership, which is, once again, the political will of both President Marcos and President Macron.
You know, it's interesting. I sense a similar thing with our Espanol counterparts a few years ago. And in fact, when I was in Madrid the other year, in Instituto Cervantes, they put Rizal, our national hero's work, in the canon of Spanish literature. It was a very emotional moment, and this kind of a rediscovery of each other after more than a century of let's just say mutual alienation, because America was there, right? And our Espanol friends were saying, like, there's a reappraisal of bilateral relations. But of course, for the Spanish, because of their history here, it's not too hard for them to do a catch-up. Speaking of France, what are the catch-ups that are happening? Let's talk about food, for instance. I mean, recently I heard finally the Michelin star folks were here. We don't know when the stars are gonna. Maybe by the time this taping is out, hopefully a star or two is at least out. But how important are those things? Because they really put countries on the map, right?
Absolutely.
Cuisine is, not to be Anthony Bourdain about this, but right, that's essentially your royal highway to another culture.
No, but it's why you mentioned food, and I think that's also one thing that we have. I mean, France and the Philippines have in common the passion for food, and of course, the gastronomy is a great asset of diplomacy. And maybe we'll come back also to that. I was on board our aircraft carrier during the weekend because that's the first port call of our strike carrier group, and the cuisine on board is supposed to be the best one of the French cuisine.
Oh, right.
And it's always an opportunity, gives always an opportunity to show our assets. So indeed, food, gastronomy is a diplomatical tool, definitely. And the fact, this news that I learned, even though I don't know exactly when they will come, that Michelin is coming also to the Philippines, that's great because it will really help acknowledge your own gastronomic assets and to make that well known. And then we know very well the story. Many people use Michelin guides as a basis for tourism.
Yeah.
They take the guide and then they decide to go to one country or one place and then another because there are Michelin stars restaurants. So I really hope that will happen here in the Philippines, and I'm ready to be part of the guests, of course, who will taste the food.
And what about economic relationship? Because for instance, the Germans and Dutch are going to be involved in the massive Sangli airport projects. The Spanish have also been ramping up their investments here as they also welcome more Philippine investments in Spain, which is something interesting I noticed there. A lot of Filipino tycoons are also investing in España. What about France?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have a very strong automobile industry, and you have also, of course, we'll go to your defense industry soon, but of course, when it comes to nuclear technology, you're one of the leading countries in the world and one of the few major countries in Europe that is holding on to that, because whether it's España or Germany and other countries, they're moving in a different direction. Can you tell us a little bit about, in terms of civilian energy cooperation and also in terms of manufacturing? The reason I'm saying that is because I think there is a conscious understanding in the Philippines that yes, we're the fastest growing or second fastest growing in this part of the world, but it's a very service, low to medium end oriented one. We have a lot of semiconductor investments, but it's not that high value added as we want. So there's really growing conversation about industrial policy, including by yours truly. I'm pushing this argument. In fact, in our conversation with our friends in Washington, D.C., I just had a piece with American Affairs Journal. These are much more conservative, influential, heritage foundation type of guys who are looking at how, for instance, the U.S. can develop ties with China-free counterparts, countries that are not too dependent on China. So the Philippines is clearly positioning itself as a kind of a reliable friend for friendshoring. Where does the France and the Philippine aspect come in terms of manufacturing investments and energy investments?
So energy would be key because precisely from time to time what I hear from French companies, French investors that would be very interested to invest in the Philippines, it's that the price and the costs of energy are from time to time and quite often deterrent.
Yeah.
So our view on this is that the Philippines has to work on ways for reducing the cost of energy, being more self-reliant on energy. And it's good because we have indeed a lot of technology. We have huge experience in nuclear civil energy because we are, and it's maybe not well known, so I just keep repeating, France has 70% of its energy mix coming from nuclear civil energy. Since 70 years, 0 incident. And it enables us to have, of course, green energy, and to be more self-reliant than maybe other neighbors in Europe. So, and we can share that technology. We have a major French company, EDF, which has already sold power plants all over the world. And we are ready also to accompany the movement of the Philippines towards a shift towards nuclear civil energy. We have also French companies already present and already interested to do more on other kinds of renewable energies like solar plants, like hydrogen. And that's really something that politically both President Macron and Marcos once again decided that would be high priority for the reinforcement of our bilateral relations. So energy is really one priority as such, but also because it will help the Philippines transition towards a more greener energy and also a more cheaper energy, and then enables for more investment in the end. There is another field I could mention that we have already French companies involved is public transportation. Alstom, for example, is a great French company dealing a lot with some current projects and together with the Japanese ODA, and for example, the subway, the metro here in Manila. And we could imagine other projects. I mean, the needs for public transportation in your country is immense. And we are ready to step in and to consider new projects that we could help to finance through our Bank of Development, AFD, which is present in the country, but also involving European partners, for example, the European Investment Bank. And then that could also be considered at some point as a global gateway project, as you were mentioning. So public transportation is also an aspect that we are considering very carefully. I could continue, if you let me, with maritime security. And we have indeed French companies that are already present in the country. You know that the Philippine government has announced that that the Coast Guards would acquire 40 vessels. Probably it's not dealt with in the Finnish aspect yet, but probably with a French company, very famous one. And we have that expertise being also, like the Philippines, a maritime nation. Right. We understand perfectly the needs for maritime security, the opportunities of the blue economy, and that's why we really want to do more also on that priority. So it's at least three: energy, public transportation, maritime security, and climate change. But I mean, the sky is the limit. When we decide to open up, then why not envisage other areas? And it's true that you mentioned the FTA negotiations, so the foreign free trade agreement, with the EU. The negotiations have resumed now last year in 2024, and it's going on a good path. So it will also at some point be beneficial for the Philippines and for European countries like mine to benefit from an access to market that will be really easier than today.
We'll go to geopolitics more because I think before understanding what's happening in this part of the world in terms of our Indo-Pacific strategy, we have to first of all clarify or demystify your state of affairs in Europe, because there's a school of thought that Europe first should get its house in order before trying to flex its muscle, and some are saying it's not mutually exclusive and they both actually go hand in hand. But before going there, I want to zero in on the global gateway, the connectivity initiative. Just for people who are not familiar, because I think, to be honest, not many people have been familiar. I only got familiar with it a few years earlier when I was writing about competing projects, let's say BRI of China, which everyone knows about, although no one knows about the exact details, right? It's a big kind of a catch-all kind of term for whatever China investments make. The Japanese also have had their own connectivity initiatives and very big in Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines. The Americans, of course, it's much more defense-oriented, security-oriented. All the more recent years, they're trying to get involved in more transportation infrastructure. And last year, there was the announcement of Japan, Philippine, U.S. trilateral security framework and the so-called Luzon economic corridor, right? $100 billion supposedly are going to come in. Where does Europe come in terms of that? What is this connectivity initiative that you're looking at, Global Gateway? How is it different from the Chinese one or the Japanese one or what the Americans were hoping to put on the table at some point in time?
Well, I could tell you that indeed Global Gateway is about connectivity and having a partnership that is mutually beneficial. I could not compare to others, it's not my point. What I see is that indeed we are maybe less good at branding what we are doing as European Union projects, and Global Gateway can mean everything or nothing, and it makes it even difficult to understand that it's a European funding process. But so we have to work on that for sure. But talking about the projects and the implementation of the projects, I think we are very good, because what matters actually is the progress that can be done on the ground by our partner. And let's talk about the Philippines. The Philippines has committed and is engaged in a project that we call labelized Global Gateway, but anyway, it's called CRIMARIO. It's the capabilities and the access of the Philippines to our knowledge on what the information on what is seen on the seas, right. What is going on the seas. So
ISR,
and that's key information,
ISR, yeah.
Key communication and interoperability, which contributes to connectivity, of course. And what is important is that it is done, it's implemented when you look really at the results. Let me give an example on the use by the Philippines of CRIMARIO. Lately, the Carrier Strike Group was engaged before coming to the Philippines in a multilateral exercise called La Pérouse. Many countries participated. The Philippines participated remotely as an observer, but they participated using this technology, CRIMARIO. So it means that it's maybe our asset as Europeans when we step in, when we come into a project, is that we are doers. And naming other examples of cooperation that we engaged as EU with the Philippines, I could mention the Go Just project, which is a project and a cooperation, a project that helps the justice being more independent, being more accessible. And it's all about a transfer of knowledge, a transfer
capacity
of expertise,
building.
Capacity building.
Yeah.
Of course, it might be not that easy to brand. It's difficult to put a European or a French flag on these kind of projects. But I can assure you that the beneficiaries of those projects, when you listen to them, they are very happy with the projects that are financed by EU. So not that we want always to be compared to other big players, the one you named, but we have our own way of doing, and it works.
Well, the reason I talk about comparison is not because maybe you want to be compared or you are actively trying to compare, but because that's how it's perceived, right? It's always a question of who got the best thing to offer. It's a geopolitical competition in many ways, or at least that's how actively the Chinese are positioning, and the Japanese are acting also to counterbalance what they feel could be a kind of overbearing Chinese influence. I mean, as the late Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew said in a cable, give us options, because we don't want to be left with just one option, particularly if the option is the giant neighbor to our north, right? Is the gateway also about hard infrastructure? Is it about only capacity building? What are we looking at? I mean, obviously, the implication is that we're not talking about $1 trillion, Belt and Road Initiative type project, but just to concretize to people, like for instance, how much grant aid, what kind of projects is EU and France in particular invested in Southeast in the Philippines, especially now that the United States is kind of upending, to be honest. The USAID program is being gutted out as we speak. So is there a sense that maybe Europe can play a more active role? Because at the end of the day, there's always China or even Russia and other countries who are willing to step in as an instrument of, some would even say, sharp power, not only soft power.
Well, EU is doing already a lot, and we are not, our goal is not to step in or to replace or to complement others. One really important aspect, I think, that has to be underlined is that, of course, we also root our cooperation on values, and what unites us. And a lot, by the way, unites the Philippines and Europe. But it's always grounded in also our shared values, international law, multilateralism. So I think, of course, I understand the idea that we have to make options possible, and then it's a sovereign, it's a sovereign choice from a country to choose with whom you wish to partner, and that's also what we are doing. We've been France in our independent foreign policy advocating forever on the fact that no one wants to be trapped in a binary choice. So options is good. Diversification of partnership is good. The thing is, indeed, when you choose and you go for EU, you can be sure that implementation will happen. A long-standing commitment. It's not like one day yes and the other no. And it goes also with our values, what we have in common, and what unites us as sovereign countries under rules-based or international order.
Speaking of rules-based international order, I mean, that's something that is increasingly under question nowadays, because the United States, the supposed pillar of that rules-based international order, is moving in a direction that has rattled a lot of people, including Americans themselves. Not only the Democratic Party, there are many people in the Republican Party who will tell you they're not sure about how things are going. I've attended the Munich Secret Conference, not this year, but in previous years, and I always noticed that transatlantic relations was something that was seen as very important to keep, for instance, Russia in check, right? Not to mention threats from other new regions, right? And my sense from conversation with friends in Munich and friends in Europe and Germany, among others, is that it was truly a shocking moment. And for me, it was shocking because why are we shocked? I mean, this is Trump 2.0. Everyone knew that this is going to be an even more strident version of its first iteration, if I can put it that way. And some people would look at it as this is not only a transactional administration in comparative terms, let's say to Biden, but it's a much more, some would even say, illiberal. I mean, I remember a speech of J.D. Vance at times that he was almost chiding Europe for being almost too woke, right? Like, you should allow the far-right guys to come here. You should allow the far-left. And I don't know how to put it. I mean, Kennedy had a term for that. There was a series of cartoon back in the 50s, 60s called the Ugly American, right? This kind of a swashbuckling Americans coming in and just telling the world what to do. And that's why there was a US aid project established during the Kennedy administration. And now we are where we are. Now, I know you're a diplomat and you don't have to say what the things I'm saying. And this is a conversation. So let me just say this part that I have to say. As a diplomat and represent one of the major powers in Europe, my sense is your principal, President Macron, has been harping on this for year after year since Trump 1.0. Has the latest episode of Munich Secret Conference, and in particular, the mixed signals, to put it mildly, on the Ukraine commitment question, do you think that might finally provide the impetus for Europe to really operationalize its strategic autonomy discourse? I mean, I've been hearing this for a long time. All of us want strategic autonomy, but you have to put your money where your mouth is, right? And as we speak, the Germans are trying to come up with a new coalition, most likely led by CDU, and the prospective Chancellor of Germany, Mr. Merz, is someone who seems to be more or less on board also with supporting Ukraine and ramping up Europe's defense posture. Can you tell us a little bit about let's first talk about the traditional European players, the Franco-German, let's say, alliance and locomotive of EU. Before I go to the Eastern Europe, because we had Foreign Minister Sikorski here a few months ago, was talking about how Eastern Europe is stepping up, Poland is stepping up. Your foreign policy chief is from Estonia, someone we met in the past, and she's very passionate about more voice for Eastern Europe. But just from a French point of view, from Macron's point of view, and maybe also Germany point of view, because you two are the biggest power still in European Union by your sheer size. How are you going to cope with the second Trump administration, or do you think change is already underway? We're just seeing a lot of flash in the pan, but it's just a matter of time before Europe moves in the right direction.
No, I do think that changes are already on the way, and you're kind to mention that it's been constant French foreign policy to advocate in favor of more European autonomy,
Since
strategic
de Gaulle, at
autonomy.
least, at least.
Since de Gaulle, it's
Yeah.
part of our DNA, I would say, as being French and French diplomats. We are keen on this. After de Gaulle, President Macron, indeed, in the Sorbonne speech, made very clear
Last
that
year, yeah.
Europe had to think about being more autonomous. It doesn't mean that it was never meant to mean that we would cut our historic links within the Atlantic Alliance and with the US, which is the oldest ally of France. So it's not about that. It's just to be stronger as such and as Europe. And actually, I was saying, yes, it's already in the process. For many years from now. I mean, we are 27, so it's can appear quite slow, but it's more and more every day. And we had 2 moments of truth on that, which show that we have moved already. One was COVID. In COVID times, we have managed within EU to invest in capacities for vaccines, for example, that it was huge, really huge. So in a moment of crisis, not a war, but in a moment of crisis, though, we have been able to decide together to invest more. So that was a good first signal. The second one is a sad signal, and we all wish we would never have to see that happen in Europe again. The war in Ukraine, I was saying today is February 24, 3 years after this brutal, illegal war that Russia alone decided to launch in Ukraine. And I'm taking a few minutes, if you agree,
Please go ahead,
to come back on that, because different fake news, disinformation, narratives on this. We have to be very clear and to come back to the facts. There is one country, only Russia, who decided to launch an illegal, unprovoked, illegitimate and brutal war against the neighbor Ukraine.
Or one person, some would say. It's really Putin's, because I talked to a lot of Russians. Some of them were like not that 100% sure about this. Yeah.
Anyway, that's the facts. One country is the aggressor, the other is the one that fights. And I want to praise the courage of the Ukrainians. It's been 3 years now, and they're under a lot of victims, a lot of casualties, a lot of refugees that we welcomed in Europe, all over Europe. And it's not only an assault on the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine, it's also an assault on the international rules-based order. And that is why no one can put like a mild look at the situation, thinking it's really really far away from here. Or no, the whole world should be concerned by what's going on here. And this war in Ukraine had also the effect of gathering the whole European countries and EU, but also other Europeans, non-EU members, could mention the UK, Switzerland, Norway. I mean, we are all committed and we are all standing with Ukraine since day one, and we will continue the support because what is at stake is really, really a matter of sovereignty all over the world. And that is true that this second event has probably contributed to help Europe understand that we had to be more autonomous. So the concept of strategic autonomy, I remember very well when President Macron launched it. No one really understood and or didn't want to understand. But now it's been really concrete, be it during COVID time or the support that we have been able, the 27 of us, to provide for Ukraine, and that we will continue to provide as long as the war continues.
Does that mean you're going to increase your defense spending as a share of your GDP? I mean, considering economic conditions in Europe are not optimal. But the reason I'm saying that is, if you there was a map I saw when I was with some defense official in a major Asian country, and they showed us a map, and this was in defense ministry last year, and essentially the argument was, if you look at it, these are the militaries of countries like Israel, of Iran, and then China, India, even bigger, right? And then if you look at Europe, it's very small compared to these regional powers, right? So, and the idea there was there's a lot of punching below the weight that has happened in Europe for a long time. Now, I know that's unfair in the sense that, a lot of great scholars like Andrew Moravchik, for instance, have written about how Europe actually has provided a lot of non-traditional security assistance, whether it's in Afghanistan stabilization, it's peacekeeping, among others. So that's not captured by standard defense expenditure. But I think any reasonable person would also look at how, by PPP terms, for instance, Russia is spending $300-400 billion on defense, and that's bigger than the entire defense budget of Europe, right? And if you look at the number of troops Russia can mobilize compared to even the largest European countries, it's not even in the same league. Now, I'm putting aside questions of quality and valor in international law. Do you think that there's enough shock here for Europe, for European populations to be willing to welcome some adjustments in terms of defense prioritization? Because we see that here in Asia. Japan has decided to double as a share of GDP from 1% to around 2%. Taiwan has suggested that they may go even over 4%. Philippines, despite our limited capabilities, we're allocating close to $1 billion for new acquisitions, for instance, for the upcoming year. Although there's some debate between program and non-program parts. I just want to understand, or rather for our audience, who from the outset said, oh, Europeans are rich people, they're posh people. Why don't they have big armies? Like the Egyptians have big armies. Tiny Israel has big armies. Iran has a big army. What about you guys? For the purpose of those audience, because the reason I say that is because I don't know how to put it, the MAGA, the Trumpian people, that's the rhetoric, that the Europeans have been essentially piggy banking on America, that you guys are rich, you have all the resources, but it's always the Americans that you want to save you when trouble comes with the Russians or someone else. And that's why now you have to step up. Or at least for me, that's the message basically J.D. Vance and a lot of top officials of the U.S. have been saying. What do you have to say to that kind of narrative, let's just call it?
Well, first of all, we, as friends, we have always advocated for European countries to be more concerned and to invest more on their own sovereignty issues and defense. So, I wouldn't feel any different from what you are saying on the need for Europe to be to invest more. I think that's a path that many countries have started to shift. We have increased also our budgets, and there are discussions, and it is a difficult discussion. We have to be honest, and indeed our economic situation in our aging countries like in Europe, that's also a difference that has to be taken into account. It's of course not the same. We don't have the same growth, and it's much more difficult to decide to invest in defense because it means that we'll have to make choice. So it's difficult. It requires a lot of pedagogy and for politicians to explain in parliament. So we are doing that in Europe. Will it be enough? I cannot tell, probably not, but we are on that path to continue investing more in our defense capabilities, in our defense industries, and also in our political power within Europe. You can see also the change in 20, 30 years, the immense change in the reality of what Europe is politically speaking.
And growing role of countries like Poland or the Baltic states having more voice within.
Absolutely.
Poland is one of the biggest defense spenders already. A lot of our Black Hawk helicopters here in the Philippines come from Poland.
Absolutely.
They're playing a very central role as a frontline state. The reason I ask about that aspect is because there's also this narrative. It's like, what are these Europeans doing in this part of the world? First, take care of your own business. Like Russia is already, too much for you. Like, why are you coming here? So, Ambassador, can you tell us a little bit about, is there an evolution in your China policy? Because your FTA agreements with China hit a deadlock, and you have discussed kind of like a systemic rivalry with China, which again is another term that has got people thinking. What does that mean? Is it the same kind of strategic competition that the Americans are talking about when they talk about the new era of great power competition? And then also you had your EU President Ursula von der Leyen talking about, we're willing to also recalibrate our relations with China, probably in a signal to the US not to, take Europe for granted. The reason I'm asking is that because us in ASEAN, and particularly in a country like the Philippines, which I think I can proudly say of all Southeast Asian countries who have been consistently supportive of Ukraine. Zelensky was here not long ago. Zelensky was very happy that we supported them in multiple UN resolutions. And no offense to other major democracies in Asia, we don't need to name names. They abstained over and over again when it was brazen. And some of them are even buying even more Russian oil and reselling it to you guys. So our sense is, as far as rules-based international order is concerned, as far as values-based foreign policy is concerned, even during the Duterte administration, when our current Secretary of Foreign Affairs was our UN ambassador, Eduardo Manalo, we have been consistently on the same page with you folks on the issue of values-based international order. And of course, even on other conflicts, including conflicts in Gaza, for instance, I think the Philippines' position was much more closer and nuanced, like Europe, than say the American position or the Malaysian position, which is like taking one side basically, right? Each of them different side of the coin. The question here is, can Europe play also an important role in this part of the world? And how are you going to balance the importance of China to you? France, and more even so in Germany case, China is a huge market, but China is not everything, right? There's India coming, there's Indonesia coming, Philippines coming. How are you going to do that balancing act, just as you're also, recalibrating your relationship with the United States? That's a very difficult task, isn't it? Balancing act.
First of all, I would say that we, France, at least, we've been constant in being more and more interested in the region, meaning Indo-Pacific region.
In general, yeah.
First of all, of course, we have a specific reality here is that France has overseas territories in the region, in the Pacific Ocean, but also in the Indian Ocean. So we are, we are part of the family. So of course we are here.
The resident power.
A resident power. We have constantly in the South Pacific 8,000 men and women from the armed forces, from the French armed forces present all the time. And we have those deployment like the one we received in the Philippines, Clemenceau 2025, the deployment of destroyers, frigates, the strike carrier group that was here for 3 days, because we are part of the region, we are committed to the region, and we want to ensure the protection of our citizens and also the freedom of navigation everywhere in the world. So it's not because France or Europe seems to be very far away from here that we are not also either part of this region, like it is our case in France, or anyway interested in having access to the sea, the freedom of navigation at sea or in the air, wherever in the world, because international law provides for that. And every European country is interested on what is going on in the region also for those kind of reasons, because we all benefit. Trade needs freedom of navigation, and we will all reciprocally benefit from a free and open Indo-Pacific. So we need to be focused. And of course, Ukraine is top priority because it's existential for Europe. It's in Europe. But President Macron has always been very clear that it would not mean that we would be less present in other parts of the world. And since 2018, you can see more of France all the time in the region, and particularly in the Philippines, which shows that, yes, we have issues in Europe, but we have many issues in other parts of the world, the Middle East being one, you named it, and the situation in the Indo-Pacific also.
And when it comes to bilateral relations with the Philippines, things have been moving very fast. Last year, you were basically part of the Balikatan exercises that came out of nowhere. To a lot of people, it's like, wait, whoa, that's too fast. And then, of course, you were in the headlines when you discussed that the reciprocal access agreement is also in negotiation. A couple of your very senior defense officials were here last year. So big moves. As of February 2025, what is the status of negotiations? I know these things are complicated. The Japanese one I've been following and writing on for like 3-4 years since pandemic. I remember very well. So Obviously, people have to be patient. This is bureaucracy. There's a lot of complications, a lot of, boxes to tick. But how optimistic you are that we're moving towards a reciprocal access agreement, because that will put you at least next year after the United States and all, right? Along with Japan and Australia and those countries who have very close defense relationship with us. And that would be historic, because I think for the Philippines, we also want strategic autonomy. We have been, at the front line of standing up to China without asking for America's direct assistance. We have been doing that for more than a year. We're willing to also play the big power game in a sense of, if Americans want us to host some weapon systems that trigger the Chinese, then so be it, and we can negotiate accordingly. So I think the Philippines is stepping up, and I was glad to see that some of our top officials are talking about the Philippines as a middle power, no longer a small power.
Correct.
This is among the 15 largest countries, 30 largest economies, and it's just going to keep up, moving up the ladder, right, in years to come because of the population, demographics, and other dynamics. So, first of all, what is the status of the RRA negotiations? And what are the big things that, again, without giving away too many things, that we should look forward to bilateral relationship? A visit by Macron, a visit on the other direction? I mean, again, I don't know to what degree can you share these things, but should we be excited about some big moves here and there?
Well, I have to say, we can name the moment where when we decided indeed to put a boost on our bilateral relationship at the level of defense and security issues and strategic issues. It was December 23 when, for the first time ever, a French Minister of Armed Forces came to the Philippines. Sébastien Lecornu was here for a historic visit, December 23, met his counterpart, Secretary Teodoro, and together they decided to have a roadmap that would lead to increasing our strategic and operational and military intimacy, much more military cooperation. Participation in Balikatan was, of course, the first translation of that letter of intent and that roadmap, but also was already on the agenda the fact that we would engage a negotiation on a VFA, visiting forces agreement. We have we agreed with the Philippines that France would be the one to issue the first draft, which we did last October. I transmitted to the Philippine authorities the first draft of a VFA, and we are now waiting for the Philippines to respond. We know very well that the negotiation of the reciprocal access agreement with China was very fast. With Japan, Japan was a huge, quick success. We know also that there are other countries like us in the
Canada
pipeline,
and New Zealand,
Canada, and France. So we hope now that we will be next in line.
The Japanese one is going to make it easier for the rest, because it kind of shattered the glass, right? Because for a long time it was just Australia, US to us, right?
Correct, yeah.
And even the Australian Status of Forces Agreement was stuck actually in Senate for a long time until the Scarborough crisis. So now suddenly the floodgates are open, but in a good sense, in the sense that it allows us to diversify our relations.
Absolutely. And so that's something that, I mean, I cannot predict any outcome in the coming future, but I'm quite positive that it will happen soon, because the opportunity for exchange with the Philippine authorities we had last weekend, the 3 last days with the carrier strike group being in town, were very, very positive. So I think we will be there. And about any visit of President Macron, President Marcos,
in Singapore, right? At the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue.
President Macron has confirmed already he would be the keynote speaker at the Shangri-La Dialogue end of May. And he'll probably visit other countries in the region. President Marcos has been invited also to visit France.
Hopefully after elections, of course.
Most likely after the elections. I hope we can organize that, and that would be a perfect occasion indeed to mark a new milestone in the strengthening of our bilateral partnership.
Choose France and maybe choose the Philippines also. I think that's the way forward. Together. And I found it always interesting when Europeans say, we have to do better with branding. And when I look at branding of everything, the French and the Italians are doing very well. So maybe you have to translate your fashion branding prowess into diplomatic branding prowess. And this was always the constructive, friendly advice I give to our friends in the European Union and also key countries. Merci. Thank you so
Thank you
much
so
for that
much.
fantastic discussion. It was seamless. I think
was
I look forward to
very
more of this
fruitful.
conversation in the future. Hopefully, when
Anytime.
President Macron is in town or we have more concrete development. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify and YouTube. I'm Richard Hidaria, and that was The View from Manila, where One News, all sides, all the time.